But
There it is.
so I'm sorry about that. So here we are. It's Friday the 10th, chemical dependency seminar. And you're going to get to hear from me twice. I'm sorry about that. And we had a gap in the schedule. And so I'm going to step in with something I think you may be interested in. And even though we're running late, hopefully we can get some conversation around this because I think it'll be of some help to people. And let's see here. So, like I say, I don't have any financial disclosures to make. This is CD seminar. It's a joint project by the Department of Psychiatry, Behavioral Sciences, and Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. And we meet each Friday for, except for in the summer and on holidays, to try to improve education and develop the workforce. So that's where we are today. So. Before we get into the objectives, let me mention that next week, Kari Hurd is going to be here. She's a public health officer from Oklahoma. She used to be in charge of IHS here in Oklahoma since she's moved on to SAMHSA, and she's the regional director at SAMHSA. So she covers the 5-state area, including Oklahoma. And she's going to talk to us about SAMHSA initiatives and what's going on in the substance abuse world treatment world, kind of enlarge. And so, you'll want to hear from Kari. So she'll be with us next week. And then the last week of the month, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Kelsey, we're going to hear from the genetics guys, and they're going to talk with us about genetics and substance use. So that'll be a good presentation. So today we're going to talk about resilience for substance abuse counselors, and we're going to talk about kind of the current state of substance abuse counselors coming right out of, or behavioral health community behavioral health providers coming out of COVID. Then we're going to take a look at the relationship between skills, capacity, and resilience. I'll talk about 6 capacities or competencies that help instill resilience. And we're going to talk about how to build that. So that's kind of where we're going to go today. And we'll stop along the way for comments. So feel free to comment. And then maybe we'll have some other time at the end for some reflection and stories. So our group did a fear of COVID study back in probably starting at about 2021. I think probably started at the end of 19 when COVID got started. And so part of the study was to assess folks' fear of COVID. And then we did that here at the Health Science Center. And the next thing we did was we sent out a survey, and I think we used Oklahoma LADC roles as kind of the group or the population. And we sent out a survey and we asked them to fill it out. And it took a look at COVID, took a look at some other kinds of things we'll talk about here in a minute. And we looked at depression. We screened for depression, we screened for anxiety, substance use, alcohol use, perceived stress, and then sleep problems. And so this, we'll put together the first manuscript and it's being submitted for publication. We'll see how it goes. But anyway, I thought I'd go over that kind of as a backdrop to the resiliency stuff. So is 170 providers from the Oklahoma community. That'd be all over Oklahoma. About 60% were female. Most of them had a master's degree of some sort. About 30% were in private practice. About 17% were minority. So most of them were white. The age range was 18 to 74. About 50% of them were between 35 and 64. And for screeners, we use the PHQ-2 and the GAD-2, and then we use the COVID fear scale, which had been published probably in 19 or 18 and been used in several different countries. Only been used once or twice here in the United States. So we were doing some basic kind of research with it. So what we ask them folks in terms of depression and anxiety, remember the PHQ-2 is a public health questionnaire. It focuses on depression. And the 2 questions are, you have little incidents for pleasure in doing things. And you're feeling down, depressed, or hopeless. And so then people rate that as either not at all, several days, more than half the days, or nearly every day. And then for the GAD2 is general anxiety disorder. And here we're talking about two questions are, you feel nervous, anxious, or on edge, and you're not able to stop or control your worries. So those are the two mental health questions that we looked at in this set of analysis. And here's what we found out. It's kind of startling. The COVID was difficult, but what we found out just across the board, this would have been May and June. That's when we of 2020. That's when we did the survey. And so we ask them, usually ask over 2 weeks or a week, have you had those symptoms? We asked 30 days. So we increased the time frame just a little bit. And this is what we found out. So in terms of these two questions, little or no interest in doing things, and feeling down, depressed, or hopeless, the scores, the median scores were 2.2 and 2.3. And then for the GAD scores, it was 2.7 and 2.3. You see the minimum, maximum, those kind of things. But then we summed the questions. When you sum those questions for the depressive scale, the PHQ-2, the mean score was 3.2, and for the anxiety, the GAD2, it was 3.6. So what that tells us is we had quite a few people who were at that time who were practicing, at least of this sample, who were depressed and anxious. And so here's another graphic of this. So this is the percentage of the providers, Oklahoma City, May to June, who were having some depression or some anxiety. So percentage of response, and you can see that the PHQ-9 to GAD. So, 3 is generally considered to be kind of a cutoff. We'll go over that here in a minute. So you can see that above 3, there was quite a few. So 14.
Dr. Brand?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are you, I don't know if you're sharing your slides.
Huh? Okay, hang on. Hang on. I'm glad you said that.
Sorry, I let it go so long too. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I didn't say anything either. I'm just sitting
I was
here.
in such a hurry that
I know.
forgot to share.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, so we're gonna back it up here. So we'll start over. All right, so these are the objectives. We'll go over those again. But this is the study I was talking about. You can see what we were talking about here. So you got the females, male, so it's about 60% female. Most people had a master's degree, about 30% private practice. They're the ages. And then we were just talking about PHQ-2 and the GAD2 and the fear of COVID scale. So it's a 7-item scale. So, and this is what we were talking about. So you're familiar with the PHQ-2. These are the two questions, and the GAD2, these are the two questions. This is how you're rated. So each one of those questions. So now here we go. So this will make a lot more sense than me trying to describe it to you. Whew. So these are the results. So here we go. You can see that when you sum the scores for the depression, the PHQ-2, about 3.2% of the folks on a mean score. So the cutoff is about 3 for somebody who needs more attention. And for the anxiety scores, it's 3. It was 3.6. So this is May, June of the 170 community health providers who responded. That's how it looked. So quite a few people are depressed. And then here you can see the graph. So the percentages of response. So this is a 4. So you can see a lot of anxious folks, as you would kind of expect. You had a lot of people who answered, to one question on the depression scale. They answered yes, but then they kind of come down. And, you're talking about 10, 15, 12% are being depressed. And then you got quite a few here who were. So the next thing we did on this one was then we took a look at, what were the factors related to anxiety. So we did a multivariate analysis. And so what I found out was when we put the model together, these are the 4 items that were related to the most or significant and related to anxiety. And we did a backward regression on this. But so predisposing conditions, this really had to do with, you're over the age of 65 or you had asthma, or, maybe you were a smoker, maybe you had immune deficiency problem, maybe you had something like that. So heart disease, or any of those kind of major things that we would talk about as predisposing conditions. We had a list of about 7 of those, plus being over the age of 65, since being older was considered at risk. And then a minority status. Remember, we had about 17%. This was our anxiety score. And then this was a background variable. And it's like, we just asked a question, have you had a family member who's been diagnosed? So we thought that what would happen here is that if you had a family member who had been diagnosed, you'd be more anxious and depressed. What we found out was not having a family member actually contributed to the anxiety. And when we went to the literature to figure out why that was, it's kind of the unknown. So there is literature that supports the idea that when you don't know something, you're more anxious. And so not having or fearing that your family member is going to get COVID actually produces or is related to more anxiety than, say, already having somebody who either passed or who got well from it because you don't know what to expect. And so this was a little bit of a surprise for us. The factors were not related significantly to depression, but they were to anxiety. So this sets the stage. And so for resilience and skills and capacity, so that's kind of the background for resilience, skills, and capacity. I'm surprised anybody's still with us today. But anyway, so here we go. So here's Louis, and Louis is trying to do the best that he can to cope with COVID or any other kind of problems. And you can see that Louis got some good things in there and some bad things. You got vacations, and you got marriages or birthdays, you got death, and you got financial either problems or you got more money, all of those things, you know, as you're thinking about the Holmes-Ray scale that's been around forever, all of those things are good or bad, require people to adapt and to adjust. And when you have to adapt and to adjust, then it creates stress. And then a lot of times people end up with these kind of problems. So they may have fatigue or anxiety or worry or irritability, fusion, withdrawals. And so this is Louis, and he's trying to do the best he can to withstand these winds of change as they attempt to blow them over. Where we really want to get is to someplace like this. And so now that Louis got a little shield there in front of him to help him cope and to deal with these kind of stressful events, the strain is not as great. And so he's more likely to experience wellness, peace of mind, and resilience as a result of having to deal with challenges. So it's kind of like when the arm gets broken, it heals back stronger. So a lot of times when we're under stress, if we are resilient and we have the skills to manage it, we actually grow and we actually become more resilient. And we'll talk here a little bit about what these initials mean. But this is his personal capacity, and this is his ability, the skills that he has, the capacity. This capacity is built on skills to deal with these kind of life events. And the TTPs is a Army acronym for tactics, techniques, and procedures. And basically that just translates in my day goes better when. My day goes better when I get up and exercise in the morning. My day goes better when I, have breakfast. My day goes better when I stop for lunch. My day goes better when I, call my spouse, and say hi. My day goes better when I, do different kinds of things. So that's important to keep in mind. What your day goes better when, and then try to keep those kind of things in our activities. So when we look at the literature on resilience and we look at the literature on capacity, high functioning individuals, it generally falls out into these 6 categories. Not everybody's hitting on all 6 of these categories 100% all the time, but these 6 categories are more or less fully developed in high functioning folks. And so the first one is cognitive reflection. And as clinicians, we're familiar with this, and we're maybe good at it about doing it with our patients, but we got to be good at it about doing it with ourselves too. But it's the same kind of thing. It's the ability to reflect on your thinking and choose your thinking. And if your thinking is not working for you, then you're able to recognize that and then able to choose a better way to think of things. So if your thinking is not factual, if it's not logical, it's not helpful, then probably we need to recognize that, and then we need to change the way we think about things. So the ability to examine and evaluate, alter your thoughts and your attitudes. High performance athletes are some of the best. I think about this. I heard a quote once about Michael Jordan. He said, "When I miss a shot, I don't think about it. It's just feedback to my body, and I trust that my body will make the corrections." I remember seeing an after the game interview with Seth Curry once, and the first 3 quarters, he couldn't hit anything. And, maybe hit 2 out of 14. Golden State was way behind, and they come back in the 4th quarter and, he drains about, 13 out of 13. So the interview, after the game was, so, how did you manage to do that? And, how are you able to come back in the fourth quarter and, hit all those shots? And he said, well, what I focused on was like trying to, get back on defense. I'm trying to get the ball to my teammates. I was trying to work on floor space. So what he's telling us is he telling us what he was not thinking about. And what he was not thinking about was missing shots. He was thinking about something else. And so high performance folks learn how to monitor their thinking. If you play golf or you pay attention to golfers, you'll know that there's a lot about their thinking and their attitude. So what we think about and what we don't think about in terms of our personal lives, in terms of our work, is very important. So the ability to be able to do that is one of those competencies. Affective regulation is the ability to manage your emotions and your feelings. And so, we talk about strategies for doing that. Manage our arousal level. In the business, they talk about that, your emotional intelligence, in terms of you able to know what your emotional experience is, and you're able to read other people's emotional experience, and you're able to respond to that. So this is, and we think, clinically, we think about, progressive muscle relaxation, breathing, and all those kind of things, grounding ourselves or whatever we need to do. But the ability to be aware of your arousal level and then be able to modulate that to your interest is important. And then personal power really comes about in two kind of categories. One is, do you feel like you're doing something important? People like to feel like they're making a contribution to something. And so we, find meaning and purpose and make some kind of contribution. Your work is meaningful. It's not just, I wrote a little book once talking about a guy who had lived way out close to Texoma. He's about 18. Probably was somewhere between 70 and 80 IQ points. The whole family lived in poverty. And so I went out there to see him. I was doing a home visit. And so I was out there. So I got to talking to this guy and said, so what do you do? He's about 20, 22. He said, man, I raise earthworms. I said, what do you mean? He said, I raise earthworms. I raise the best earthworms. So what, you want to see them? I said, sure. So, man, we go out there. He's got rabbit hutches all over the big yard. He's got earthworms. And, man, he's telling me about different kinds of earthworms and how you raise earthworms and what you do with earthworms and how you get earthworms out of the ground and then how you sort them and what you feed them. And then he's telling me people from all over Texoma come to buy my earthworms to go fishing with, and I know which ones to go fishing with, and some come for their garden, and I know which ones go to the garden. So that was a guy who was in, really desperate circumstances, as most of us would describe it. But he had meaning and purpose, and earthworms was his thing. And he was proud of those earthworms. He got up every morning for earthworms. So that's an example of meaning and purpose. The other thing is you want to have some control over your life. You want to feel like that the decisions you make have some impact and you're not totally helpless. So personal power is one of those things that we look at. And, it's one of those competencies or capacities that contributes to resilience. Interpersonal stability, the easy way to say that is just not too much drama. I can stay in my hula hoop. You can stay in your hula hoop. I encourage you to stay in your hula hoop, and I will stay in my hula hoop. We can touch, we can talk, but I'm not going to crawl in your hula hoop and try to do things for you that I really can't do. So it's interpersonal stability to be able to communicate effectively. Social support is this idea that we need some support. I was just talking to Angela Lewis. She was talking about some of her research with geriatrics and how much social support was in terms of dementia, some work she was going to do there. But, really we need 3 to 5 folks that we're relatively close to. I'll call those people best friends or confidants. And most of us need, somewhere between 6 and 12 kind of in the next circle to be healthy. And it's pretty clear that social engagement is related to health. And then the 6th thing here is health behaviors. I mean, do you eat right? Do you get enough sleep? You don't drink too much. You don't smoke too much. You don't do any of those kind of things too much, and you're healthy. And so no excess. And so these are the competencies that lead to resilience. And so competencies are based on skills, and skills are things that people practice. And so we're going to talk about some skills, and these skills overlap. They're not mutually exclusive. So they contribute overall to capacity, which leads to resilience. And so we think about healthy behaviors. We can't not talk about mindfulness practice. And then we got to talk about reflection and perspective. And then we'll talk some about social support. So these skills fall in these categories. These are basically 4 or 5 skills that build capacity that lead to resilience. So fitness. So this is one of the things we're pretty sure of, that you got to be physically fit. And I mean, you have to run a marathon, but you can see, just read something the other day that, fitting is the new smoking. And so, exercise. And so, what the recommendation is 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise each week. That comes out to about 30 minutes a day. Done a lot of research. Do you need to do that all at once, or can you spread it out? And so you just need to accumulate, 150 minutes a week of moderate exercise. I saw something the other day that 11 minutes of running hard, adds hours to or years to your life. So there's a lot of research now that supports it. Same thing with sleep. We know sleep is so vitally important. Always being on the edge of, less than 6 hours of sleep, or whatever your need is, that you're just burning the candle at both ends. And so that decreases capacity, and it causes people to not be as resilient as they could be. I was deployed twice and went on very little sleep for 2 years. And I can tell you that, you just get shorter and shorter and shorter, and you make more and more mistakes when you don't get good sleep. So, so developing a routine, TTPs, where you're getting some exercise, you're getting some activity every week. There've been studies say do it all on the weekend. That's okay. If you spread it out over the course of the week, that's okay. If there's lots of different ways to do it, but your body was made to be moved. So even if it's getting up and walking and taking stairs, so physical activity, sleep, and then, the Mediterranean diet's the kind of thing that's recommended. It's kind of the healthiest cardiovascular wise. And so I recommend that people watch what they're eating and the amount they're eating, and then they're moving around. And so I use a standing desk. That's 500 more calories a day if you use a standing desk than if you're sitting. Although, you got to walk around some people get edema in their legs or their ankles, but so that's one thing that some people do. But anyway, so this is one of those behaviors that leads to resilience. Now, the mindfulness stuff, and Dr. Fink might want to, get involved here, because she's done a lot of work with heart rate variability and resonant frequency breathing, and looking at interbeat intervals and all those kind of things. And clearly that's kind of like medicine for your brain. You got something you want to add to this, Dr. Fink? So here's some of the main things you might want to look at. So the Herbert Benson's a Harvard guy. He's a cardiologist. He was one of the first one that did this back in the 80s. And that Brown book is his original. And in that book, he lays out this whole idea of this relaxation response and how you use your breathing to downregulate your arousal. It's telling your brain to calm down. So you got the autonomic nervous system, you got the sympathetic, parasympathetic. Sympathetic's the gas pedal, parasympathetic's the brake. So how you slowing yourself down. That was a million seller, and he got on TV and became very popular there at Harvard. He tells the story that when he started, he couldn't get any funding, and finally got some funding through his chair at the Department of Cardiology. He said, "Okay, Herbert, we're going to give you some money to do your research, because if anybody can fail, you can fail at Harvard." So he said, but his research was very important. The red one's the 25th edition. And now then you can go to Harvard and they got the Herbert Benson mindfulness, mind body medicine thing. You can go up there. They got it online. I took years and years ago, took a couple of online courses with him. But you can go get their certification. You learn all about mind body medicine. But one of the keys to the mind body medicine is the mindfulness breathing. You got Williams, Tinsdale, Siegel, and John Kabat-Zinn. They did a study. I think this book was published in 2000 or 1999. They were doing some research on to find out what was the best maintenance treatment for major depressive disorder. Looked at a lot of different things. Ran into John Kabat-Zinn up at the UMass and liked his mindfulness stuff. And that started the whole mindfulness investigation. John Kabat-Zinn had been at UMass doing it for years. You can go to UMass now and hear John Kabat-Zinn talk about his research, and they have a certification program over there. I like that book because it's got John Kabat-Zinn's kind of one of the guru grandfathers of mindfulness, and he in the back of that book's a CD, and people can download that to their iPhone or wherever, and they can be walked through some of the mindfulness practices. He wrote that book, Full Catastrophe Living, kind of his kind of presents kind of mindful based stress reduction program that he developed there at UMass. He kind of found the mindfulness stuff out when he was traveling out in the East, he says, and brought it back to UMass. Thought it might be helpful. He's a PhD kind of bench researcher, as where Benson is a cardiologist, a physician, and he thought it'd be helpful. So years ago, he started a stress mindfulness-based stress reduction program there at UMass, and really kind of in the same Boston area. And it was just a catch-all for anybody who wasn't getting well. So he had, type A people in there, he had people in there with cancer pain, he had people in there with cardiac problems, he had people in there with, peripheral neuropathy, he had people in there with everything. And in his books, what he talks about is he taught him mindfulness, he taught him some light stretching and those kind of things, taught him some about education, about wellness and about diet and exercise and those kind of things. And lo and behold, people started getting better. And these were people that, everybody kind of thrown in the towel. So now there's been a lot of research. There's heart rate variability research that takes a look at, really getting your breathing pattern down so that you're getting into that resonant frequency breathing. The bar reflex in your heart kind of kicks in and down regulates your, several different cycles, your heart rate, your blood pressure, all that comes down. So this is clearly a skill. This is the last story I'll tell you about this. I think I got back from one of my deployments. And I was kind of crazy. And I'd been reading about this stuff and used it clinically a little bit. I thought, well, I probably need to do some of this. So anyway, I thought, crap, now I'm gonna have to, pay somebody to teach me how to breathe. So I started looking around at the classes. What I found out was there's a Buddha monastery out here on Anderson Road, the Mindfulness Monastery, and they offer classes. And so I went out there, spent about 18 months, 2 years going to classes, kind of meeting the abbesses and getting to know all the Sufis and learning about the mindfulness stuff and the Buddhist teachings that go with it. They still offer those classes. They built a big monastery now, very nice. And I think that the new abbesses and Sufis have come over, but it was very interesting to practice with them, get it from the horse's mouth, kind of understand the teachings behind it. We use it a little bit differently than what the Buddhists do. We use it primarily to help people relax. When Buddhists might practice it for more insight and spiritual awakening or awareness, and you can certainly do that, but we use it for health, and we use it primarily for relaxation and a way to manage and regulate arousal levels. So anybody, we'll stop there for a minute. We're about halfway through. Anybody got any comments or thoughts? Dr. Fink, you got any tidbits of wisdom on us on heart rate variability, biofeedback, and how that affects people?
Well, it's a hugely emerging area of research. And I think what, some folks can, achieve resonance breathing, by doing mindful meditation, but the biofeedback aspects of it definitely helps, to ensure that you're, stimulating your parasympathetic nervous system. And there are some great apps available now for it that have really good, solid metrics on them. HeartMath sells a great app, and I think another one on Apple phones is HRV Biofeedback. They're super. We're using them in one of our research studies. So if you're interested, I do this with my research participants and they love it. They're like, I have never felt so relaxed in my life. So, and it's not a sleepy relaxed, it's a focused, relaxed, like you can really make good decisions for yourselves and manage stress and feel resilient to stressors in your life.
Yeah, I agree. I use the HeartMath biofeedback clinically with patients. And you can get that, for your desktop or your laptop for about $150. And it comes with a handheld, and it'll give a person pretty decent feedback on where they are. And that's the alert awareness, the relaxed awareness, the attentive awareness while you're relaxing. The William and Tinsdale and those guys say that, the cognitively, the trick is you let things pass. So you're not actively engaging thoughts and experiences and memories that come through your mind. And so they flash like on a big picture screen. And so you see them, you observe them, and then you let them go. So you're not actively engaged. And that mindfulness piece is what allows people then to let thoughts go that are bothering them. So we're talking about building capacity. But yeah, good. So this would be a skill anybody can learn. And it definitely helps you in terms of your resilience. So thank you. All right. So this is one that we talk about CPT, dealing with trauma and all that kind of stuff, talk about this writing. And we talk about, being able to put traumatic experiences into perspective and those kind of things. But James Pennebaker, work on this probably stands out as kind of one of the guys who learned how to do this. And this is really about reflection. And it's really about putting the story together and incorporating the feelings and the experiences and the thoughts that go with the experience. So he's now professor emeritus at University of Texas. He was doing research on this for a long time, and Smith is kind of taking over his research. This white book over here is really kind of the book on explaining his research and what he's been doing. And the expressive writing, Words to Heal, is really kind of the book where you could give it to a patient or you could read it, and it tells you about different kinds of expressive writing and how to use expressive writing. And you can go to YouTube and you can pull up a video, and Pennebaker will kind of describe it. But what they found is, I think some of the studies are really kind of interesting. He would use college students and he'd break and randomize them up into groups, and he'd have one group and he'd say, just take 5 minutes for this examination and write whatever's on your mind. And they turn it in and then they throw it away. The other group would receive no treatment. And consistently, there's a statistical significant difference between those who just took a few minutes to write about what was on their mind before they took an examination. They did other kind of studies where they'd have group discussions and they'd have half of the people randomly assigned. They just take a few minutes to write about what was on their mind, put it aside. And those groups, the people participated better. They were more engaged. They got more out of the groups. They've had, he's done studies where he just, taking college students, randomized them. And then, some of them are going to give an instructions to write. Some of them weren't. They just track things like how ill were they, how sick did they get, how many times they go to the doctor, how will they get quick. Consistently, those who are, using expressive writing to work through their day, to work through their emotional experience, to work through their interpersonal experience, do better. I mean, he's got some fascinating work on the power of pronouns. We won't get into that today, but so the idea of a skill of expressive writing, this ability to take things that are going on in your nervous system, in your brain, and to be able to put them on paper, to externalize them and to give them some bit of analysis and resolution and then put them aside, is really a skill that helps build capacity, to help build resilience. So you're talking about emotional regulation, you're talking about particularly about cognitive reflection in this case, and probably some problem solving too. So these are very interesting work, easy to read books. This one's a research book. This is the how-to book. And James Pennebaker, really interesting work that fits with building resiliency. And so then we talked about social support. So here we are. And so, we just follow this little the wire diagram here. So you got lifestyle, physical activity, nutrition, those kind of things. And then you've got social connectedness. And so the quality of social connectedness and the quantity in terms of how big is your social circle. And then you can see that those kind of things, contribute to medical adherence, which is kind of interesting. You follow the diet, execute lifestyle changes. So people who are more connected tend to live a little bit more healthy. And then you have psychological factors like stress appraisal, attributions that people make towards each other, expectations and assumptions, kind of cognitive stuff, plus kind of just a general feeling of wellness. And then all this kind of stuff feeds into these biomarkers, which are like the inflammation factor, blood pressure, gene expression. We know now that, you know, a lot about how you live really does affect the gene expression. Endocrine function, obesity, and we know those kind of things now, like obesity, diabetes, all of those kind of things. Depression are related a lot to social connectedness and lifestyle. And so here again, trying to make time to go out and to make sure that you're connected, whether you play golf or you play cards or you just talk to people on the phone, is important. Structured and functional measures of social relationships and quality of life among older adults. Does chronic disease status matter? Yes, it does. So, all right. So here we are. So if we put this together, we got Louis here, and this is kind of the way it stacks up. So at the very bottom, it says sleep, diet, and physical activity. These are health behaviors. These are kind of basic things that we try to keep going in our life. And when, you know, you're not sleeping well, your diet's messed up, now your blood sugar's up and down, physical activity's low, it's hard to be reflective on what you're thinking because your brain's not working well and maybe in a state of arousal too much, or you're too tired. And affective regulation is hard because your emotions are up and down. It's hard to get a hold of your feelings. So having this baseline of health behaviors becomes really important. But once we're able to reflect on our thinking, manage our thinking, choose our thinking, so to speak, and we're able to modulate our feeling, our arousal level, both whether we're talking about sad, depressed, happy, or we're talking about arousal level just in terms of autonomic arousal, then you're in a much better position to have interpersonal stability and to have a social support system that's stable. And then that leads to personal power, which leads to what we're talking about with resilience. And so this is kind of the way it stacks up. Starting with these basic kinds of skills, then, you know, the cognitive and the affective regulation skills, then the social skills, and then that leads to personal power resilience. So if you have a piece of paper handy or something, you can kind of take this little rag scale and you can kind of rate yourself. So red is, this is definitely identified problem that I need to work on. Amber's like I'm so-so, 50-50, 60-40. And green means I think I've got this in hand. So you can take a look at cognitive reflection and say, well, am I very good? Am I able to like think about my thinking and reflect on my thinking and adjust my thinking as I need to? Affective regulation. Do I have a couple of skills that I can use when I get aroused? And I'm pretty good at identifying my thoughts and my feelings and those kind of things. Personal power. Am I doing things meaningful? And do I feel like I have some control over my work and my family, my personal life? Interpersonal stability is this idea that I have some friends around that I can depend on. If something happens, I can call and somebody will be there. I can find somebody. If I need to talk to somebody, they'll be there. We could go into more about different kinds of interpersonal support, but I don't have the time. Interpersonal stability, social support, those people you could have. And, you know, so there's tangible support, there's emotional support, there's informational support, there's different kinds of support. And then the health behaviors I already talked about. And you can kind of, you know, do a summation of that in terms of, you know, where a person thinks they are in terms of their competencies of these capacities that then lead to resilience. So back to the COVID thing, either some of the behavioral health practitioners in the community either were under a lot of stress, which is probably the case. And so it was really wearing on their capacity and their resiliency. And maybe there was, as we know, there was a lessening of actually, you know, engaging in those skills because of the lockdown and those kind of things. Or the other thing could be that, you know, some of these guys who responded to the survey, you know, did lack resiliency, they lack capacity, and they weren't practicing skills. So either one of those two things could happen. One could be that, you know, you're pretty good, but over the time, you know, the stress just gets to you, and then the strain on you just creates some deficits, and that happens to all of us. Or the other one is you kind of lack it to begin with, and then you're just that much more susceptible or vulnerable to stress or to strain like the COVID pandemic or any other kind of thing. So at that point, we can open it up for questions. Let's see, there was anything in the chat. Just that I didn't share the slides. That's good. All right. questions or comments? I'd be interested if what your impressions are of the survey or the research that we did. And then I guess the other question that I would have is, does this make sense? And do you think it is applicable? So maybe I need to call on a few people. Well, Dia, what do you think? Lloyd, you there?
Me?
Yeah.
I like it. It was informative. I took a few notes on some of the recommendations on the books and mindfulness, so I really did like that aspect. But mostly, it was just really good. Good lecture.
Well, thanks. What were you going to say, Lenore?
Well, nothing much except that I'm probably gonna need to read some of those books because I need to, I'm just looking at something else and I'm getting distracted. I mean, we know these things on an intellectual level. I don't know, maybe I'm speaking for myself personally. I work on some of these things consistently, but not in a real structured way, you know?
I think that's a good point. I mean, sometimes you need to take your own medicine, and sometimes we're really good about telling people what they need to do or what they ought to do. Sometimes we're not too good at taking our own medicine, making time to kind of build these skills. I mean, the thing about the skills are you practice them and you get better at them, and the better you get at them, the more capacity and resiliency you have. So, that would be important, is to make time to do that.
I'll take much more time to structure my sleep schedule and everything after all the stuff that we've talked about in this department on sleep. I try to follow all of that advice. I'm always telling my patients about writing stuff down. I'm getting better at writing things down. I don't do it consistently, but there's lots of things that they say to do that, I recommend, but I need to be more structured about that.
Yeah, I think, during the COVID deal, we were under a lot of stress we didn't know. Like reading the literature for this stuff, how quickly we adapted as a profession, how quickly we adapted to telemedicine, which for a lot of us was a big learning curve because we didn't know that much about the computers to start with. And then we had to learn about computers and how to use those more effectively. And then we had to learn about telemedicine. And then we had to figure out how to actually see patients in a way that was helpful and made sense through this new medium. So in the span of about 2 years, what was just kind of a fringe thing now has become kind of the norm. It may not be the only way you see patients, but certainly has become one of the norms. So yeah, somebody had some. Yeah, Gabrielle. So healthy behaviors such as sleep hygiene is something I often preach to my clients, but also try. Yeah, that's a good idea. But we did a lot of changing, and that, in addition to worrying about COVID in your family and whether you're going to get it, that was a lot of occupational stress. And then a lot of people, because they were locked down at home, that social isolation thing came into play. So as providers, we weren't talking about cases with each other. We weren't reinforcing, we weren't helping each other. I mean, we tried here to get some groups going, but we never got any kind of social groups going. So I mean, that's a lesson learned if this ever happens again, is you really need some consultation groups to stay socially connected, because I don't know about some people, but a lot of people just stayed in their house 24/7 and worked on the computer and didn't really have any interaction with anybody. So, other thoughts?
Just to kind of build on the social interaction with others, I think, because we had in transplant, social support groups for a lot of our patients that they attended. And one thing that we do see, or that at least I hear in clinic, is some of our patients that, have AA or like smart recovery training, and they link with patients that have already had a transplant on behalf, like a liver. And it would be nice to kind of get that up and going and started again for transplant patients. So that's something that I think would be a really good priority in moving forward.
I agree. A lot of folks find those kind of connections very, very helpful. All right.
I have a question.
Anything to add, or who else?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So when you reference the PHQ-2 for assessment, is it also appropriate to use the PHQ-9?
Yes, I mean, so yeah, so a lot of places, if I understood your question, line, will use the PHQ-2, and then if they get a positive score, they'll use the 9. And I don't, you're talking about the difference of 7 questions. The deal with the PHQ-2 is it doesn't ask anything about if you've ever wanted to hurt yourself, and so that's a little different. But yeah, some people use the 2 and some people use the 9. I don't know, Dr. Fink, you're kind of a specialist on this. You got any thoughts about the difference?
I think the 9 just gives you a little more variance. It's super, takes maybe 2 minutes to complete. So the 9 just gives you a little more information, especially about any thoughts of self-harm. And you can download it. And the nice thing is it also corresponds nicely to the generalized anxiety disorder questionnaires. So they translate, it's the same format and things like that. And those are also publicly available and are good screening measures. And that's what's important to keep in mind is they're screening measures and they are not sensitive to clinical change. So they can't really be used, in multiple time points to track your patient's progress. You'd want to use something like the Beck Depression Inventory or Beck Anxiety Inventory to get change across time.
Good point. That's a good point. The other thing I think with them is, to me at least, one of the clinical values is going back and asking about the questions and finding out, so what are we talking about here? We talk about you can't sleep. Are you having trouble sleeping too much, sleeping too little? What's that look like? Then you get the more clinical picture when you go back and inquire about, so tell me about your appetite, tell me about your lack of appetite, those kind of things. So, but I do think using some screening instrument is a good idea in most clinical practices. Okay, we got time for one other comment or story or whatever else, because we're getting close to the end of the hour. I'm sorry about the goof up, this me being late, not sharing half the stuff and having to go back and redo it. So I apologize for that, but hopefully you got something out of it. Anything else? Okay, we'll call it a day. Y'all have a good, safe weekend, and we'll see you next Friday. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.